Item 11, resolution 2020-8, authorizing the creation of housing allocations 2020 and assigning allocations to pools pursuant to Chapter 14.27 of the Lakewood Municipal Code.
Thank you. So we will have a presentation by Mr. Hutchison, and then I want to ask council to talk about any sort of amendments that they might have or want to discuss, so that the community has an opportunity to weigh into that during the public comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council. Jay Hutchison, Director of Public Works. We have had discussions on this topic for some time, but I thought it would be helpful to share only 3 slides, not all the slides that you've seen on this topic, and to provide some background to those who may not have participated in the earlier discussion and may not have seen it online. As was said a few minutes ago, this is an action that's required to be done tonight because this is your last meeting in January. The growth limitation ordinance itself includes a requirement for the City Council to determine allocations and distribute those allocations among pools by City Council resolution in January of each calendar year. That's what's before you tonight, is the resolution for that, those 2 purposes, and that's why we're here tonight. I'm going to walk first through the slides that you've seen a number of times, I think 4 or 5 times in different meetings. Because it kind of sets the stage on what we are not talking about tonight and what we are talking about in this resolution. In this slide, there are going to be 3 symbols that are at the top of the slide. You can see here, the one on the left, that's the building permit application date. So it's not the date the permit's issued, it's not any other date, it's the building permit application date. The date it was accepted by the city for review. The letter P will be used for the date that the permit was actually issued. And then the circle, which will indicate whether or not an allocation is required. The 2 vertical lines are points in time. The one on the left is the election certification date, which was back in July of 2019. And the second one is the initial date that allocations are available, which is beginning in 2020. So the first vertical line is mid-July of last year. The second vertical line, we are past now. We are to the right side of that second vertical line. I'll go through, I think it's 4 different circumstances. The first is a brand new building permit application that comes in this year or later. And to get a permit, an allocation will be required. That's what you've seen. In fact, this whole slide you've seen before, no changes have been made to it. The second circumstance is a building permit application that came in between those 2 days, between July or so, or the appropriate July date was for the certification of election, and the beginning of 2020. And in that case, if the permit is not obtained until 2020, an allocation is also required. I think those 2 are 2 that everyone seems to agree on and are not really a topic of discussions that happened in one of these meetings that I recall. The third one I'll mention was dealt with back in July by the City Council through Resolution 2019-23, and that is building permit applications that came in after the certification of the election, where the permit was received before 2020. So those permits have already been issued. And in that case, the decision was that they do not require allocations, and that was covered by the resolution. And I simplified the resolution to that next resolution. The main topic that has continued the discussion really is this next one. Generally associated with the provision in 1427, the residential growth limitation, called authority to continue. And it's been described as applying to building permit applications that came in prior to the election certification date, where the permit was not issued before that date. The permit would be either issued before the end of 2019, some of those occurred, or at some later date. And in either case, the discussion since the July meeting, when this slide was first used, was that allocations would not be required in those conditions. So the resolution deals with the line I just went through that starts with the words authority to continue on the left, with permits issued sometime after the election, but the application can be before the election. If I were to summarize the resolution that's before you, before I go on to the other two slides, what I would say is it accomplishes what's shown on this chart, but it goes further than that. It reduces future allocations in both 2020 and contemplates a reduction in 2021 to compensate for the number of permits that could be issued on that line that says authority to continue. So while those would proceed just as shown on here, and then other information, the future allocations would be reduced to reduce the total number of allocations available for residential dwelling units in 2020 and 2021 to compensate for what we all know was a fairly large number of permits that were applied for prior to the election. The second slide is really in response to some information that we've heard shared, and maybe this will help clarify some of that. And that's about the number, or it's information about the permits that were issued in 2019 that resulted in new residential dwelling units. And as you know, that's really all we're talking about tonight is new residential dwelling units. There's some exceptions and exemption processes that really don't apply here because allocations aren't necessary for those dwelling units to be added to the inventory. But there are those others that will require allocations. Let me talk here about 2019. So this is before allocations were available. These are permits that were issued in 2019. Everything on this chart and on this slide will be permits that have already been issued, and the numbers will be related to the number of units, dwelling units associated with those permits. So the first information here is that in 2019, 996 dwelling units were added to the inventory, or permits were issued for 996 dwelling units. That's through the whole year of 2019. And I'm going to break that down in a couple of steps. Interestingly, or maybe not, 713 of those units had permits issued in December. It's a very large percentage of 996. But it's also predictable. As I go through this, I think you'll see why I've been anticipated, because there was a deadline created in the year that everybody moved. So let me first break down the 713. So this is the 713 dwelling units that received permits in December of 2019. Here's how it breaks down. 200 of those were a single permit that was applied for in 2018. Generally, through all of these 5 or 6 meetings when this has been discussed, we have been talking about applications that came in 2018. And I've said that several times. We've generally been focused on applications that came in 2019. I've also mentioned that there could be applications that came in before 2019 that would could result in additional dwelling units. This is an example. This particular project, as I said, it's a single building. The application came in 2019. The permit was issued in December. I'm sorry, the application came in 2018. The permit was issued in December of 2019. That's 200 of the 713 units. 156 of those dwelling units applied for their permits before the election was certified. So they came in this period of time that we're talking about today. 357 of those units complied with Resolution 2019-23. So their applications came in after the election was certified. They got their permits before the end of the year. So they're already covered and addressed by that resolution. So that's the 713, the 200 plus 156 plus 357. 156 of those are the number out of the 713 that fit within this authority to continue discussion. Of the 357, so I'm going to break it down further because these are the 357 that fit within Resolution 2019-23. We'll break that down now into segments as well. You've heard a little bit in the past of some ballpark estimates on how those come about. here's the specifics. Now we'll pass the end of the year. 281 units out of the 357 were in one project. And you may recall that there was mention that there was one project that was over 40 units. This is the one. 18 units were in one project. So it was one project that was smaller than 40 in part of the discussion. 58 units were single-family dwelling units. So this is continuing to break down. That is the breakdown of the 357. 281 was the single large project, 18 and one other single project, and then 58 single-family units. Some of those 58 may have been 4 or 5 or 6 unit projects, but they were much smaller projects. So I didn't break them out, it would have been a much longer slide. The final slide that I want to touch on is just some historical information about dwelling units in Lakewood. This is the number of dwelling units by calendar year that received permits in each of those calendar years. And you can see it bounces around, and here's what is it, 6 years worth of data through the most recent December. I don't really have any conclusion to draw from that. I just thought it would be helpful to have some information historically on what's happened for the last several years. With that, I will just remind you and all those listening that the ordinance itself creates an obligation on the city council's part to pass a resolution in January establishing the total number of allocations available in this calendar year and assigning those to approvals. And that's what's included in the resolution that you see tonight. Obviously, amendments can happen, and there's one amendment that has to happen because there are 2 blanks, at least 2 blanks, in the resolution. There has not been much discussion about how to divvy up their allocations in 2020 among the different pools. And so those numbers are blank in there. So at a minimum, the city council needs to determine what's put in those blanks, whether any other amendments are made or not. With that, I'll conclude my comments, and several folks are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate that. So I'm going to go to Mayor Pro Tem Skilling. On last Wednesday, I sent to all council and to the city staff, again, another modification to the proposal that we discussed at the last meeting. And it took into account some of the concerns about the 4 pending projects that we had heard. All of council received that, I believe, it was last Wednesday. I have additional hard copies to look at that. And I will also put this up on the document reader so the public can follow along. We had an issue with that last time. And because it was submitted last Wednesday, there was not an opportunity to get it published in the packet. That has to happen much, much earlier. So the only way to do this, to have the public see it, weigh in on it, discuss it in public comment, is to have it up on the document reader. We could do that. Yeah. So that's how we do it. If you can vote, does that work? And again, all council and staff received this last Wednesday. Just a quick recap of how we got to this position with this exact proposal. May 10th, the city published on its website guidance to residents, developers, that said if I'll paraphrase, if the application was accepted by the city prior to the date of the certification of the election, then no allocations would be needed. In July, we again dealt with, was probably the first time that we dealt with the authority to continue provision. And in that July meeting, we dealt with a certain project and some smaller ones, as Mr. Hutchinson just described. And those were projects that had done everything, but had not yet, for whatever reason, actually applied for the actual building permit yet. But they had done the things that we determined were necessary. They had done everything to secure a building permit but the application.
Then we dealt, a couple months later, I believe, the RFCA request for council action that came through where council members have put in a request that we discuss whether or not at least the 4 pending projects, whether or not they have done enough. And one of the criteria that was discussed was, had they done enough to secure under authority to continue if they hadn't done a site plan? That was one of the criteria used, and we discussed and debated that. Born out of that, then, that discussion continued, and we were in, over the holiday, right before the holiday, December 16th, we had a very, very long night, and we continued to go around and around to discuss these issues. We then came back on January, the first meeting in January, in which we discussed the first iteration of this proposal that's up on the screen now. One of the things that we had mentioned when this proposal was worked on was that the goal was to make sure that the growth limit that our citizens voted for was respected, and that it was not either artificially or just by a circumstance or happenstance that there was some spike just because of the backlog. So one of the goals was to figure out, if you have that backlog, how do you maintain that growth limit without somehow allowing all of those applications to just get their building permits? That would result in potentially thousands of applications and building permits going through, and meanwhile, the growth ordinance's 1% certainly wouldn't be respected. At its core, this proposal accounts for the backlog of applications that we've received throughout 2019 and even as far back as 2018. But it reduces the available allocations that we'll have in the future. And in that way, you'll make it so that that baseline number that's contemplated in the ordinance, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, the baseline number is, I believe, 693, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but the calculation in the ordinance, if you do it, it would be 693 allocations are available. So the goal is to make sure that we don't go above 693 allocations or dwelling units over in the foreseeable future, because again, that would render moot the whole point of the growth initiative, which was to keep growth limited to 1%. The main change, and to accomplish that, we were taking the applications that came in and counting those against any future allocations. So instead of 693 being available next year, it will be reduced by the number of applications that have come in and that were accepted. The main difference that you're seeing tonight, that was a proposed amendment that has been discussed, there's a couple of key changes. One important change is that the 235 unit development that was part of that group of 4 that was discussed ad nauseum at the last meeting, that 235 unit development would not proceed. The reason that it does not proceed under this proposal is because it has not done enough to secure, and its future is very, very uncertain. And what we cannot have happen is to allow a project such as that to somehow impact our ability to provide allocations to folks who are ready to go and aren't mired in issues, whether it's litigation or whether it's other issues. Because the goal is to have as many allocations available for those pools that people want to see, whether it be affordable housing or what have you. So we're not going to have those allocations held hostage because a project is mired in issues. That is probably the biggest change from the previous. Another important change that you see on that second page, the second to the last paragraph, the first iteration said that any pre-July 2019 applications which do not receive a building permit by December 31st, 2021 would be canceled or otherwise invalidated. And that's again because we didn't want any of these allocations being held hostage. If you're not going to build your project, we're not going to wait around. This amendment would reduce that by a year and pull it back to 2020. So that means between now and the end of this year, if those allocations, if those projects that are now being counted against 2020 and 2021, if those haven't been fulfilled, those go away, those are canceled, and those would free up future allocations. The net result is increasing the allocations. We originally had a number of 164. You'll see that in the third paragraph up in bold. The last time we were all together, we discussed if you do all of this math, you come up with only 164 allocations because you have the 4 big projects and the small ones that are counting against 2020 and 2021. In removing the 4th project, that will free up a significant amount of allocations, and you go up 164 up higher than that. I'm told though that my math is a little bit off, and it's somewhere closer in the range of 273 or 275, somewhere in there. That would be 275 in 2020 and another 275 in 2021. And if you normalize those numbers, the goal is that it hits 693 over all of the years. And one important point as well, this was also on the slide we just saw, but keeping in mind that in 2016, we had approximately 800 building permits that were issued in the city. In 2017, we had approximately 1,200 building permits issued in the city. And as recent as 2018, we had 1,200 building permits issued in the city. In 2019, there was a total of 996 permits issued in the city. The goal with this would be to make sure that the building in 2020 would go back to the 693, because again, it would be counting against, we'd be deducting the amount of applications that have come in. So I think it's important that we look at what was in pre-ordinance and what the goal of this will be post-ordinance in 2020, once we actually set the pools tonight, that the net result of that will be exactly what the voters wanted as far as the 1% year to year. And that was the goal of this. So that was, I wanted to present that tonight, and I asked, and I think Mayor Paul certainly agreed that we present that now before public comment, and also if others had other ideas and other amendments that they wanted to bring up and have that flow of ideas, to do that before we do public comment so that people can come up and comment on those. And also that I know that there were other amendments that folks have talked about today.
All right, thank you for that. So we will continue. Yes, sir.
Mayor, I need to correct one of the numbers that was on one of my slides and add a couple of other notes. The 2019 units that received permits was 966, which was correct on my 3rd slide. On my 2nd slide, I had written 996. That was an incorrect number. It's 966. I turned my 6 over. So that's an error nobody else has to point out because I just told about it already. Thankfully. Secondly, the deadline date that Councilor Skilling just talked about was the oversight is not included in the resolution that you have tonight. So whether you pick December of 2020 or December of 2021, that would be a new provision in the resolution, not because it wasn't already discussed by you, it was, as Councilor Skilling identified, it simply an oversight not included in the resolution. And then finally, this resolution clarifies the final decisions for 2020, and the ordinance requires you to do another resolution to finalize decisions for 2021. But as you've heard from Councilor Skilling, the intent is to do this over a couple of years. So there is an intent statement about 2021 in this resolution that'll remind us hopefully that next year we want to do something similar or comparable or identical. And so we'll make sure that happens. But this resolution doesn't actually set the numbers for 2021 because the ordinance required that to be done in 2021. Thank you, and I apologize for the interruption.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so we're not going to debate the amendments now, but if you would like to offer others that you're thinking about, please. Councilor.
First, I do have a clarification. The ordinance 200 Mr. Hutchison calls for allocations twice a year, and you're saying do them all at once? Can we be part ready to the discussion? Pardon?
I'm not sure we understand your question.
The question is, or the statement is, that 200 requires 2 allocation periods a year. Mr. Hutchison said 1. And we're doing 1 allocation period for all of 2020.
You create one set of allocations a year and assign them into pools. After that, the ordinance says how they flow from pool to pool throughout the rest of the year.
I believe the ordinance calls for allocations to be set twice a year. Some pools early in the year, and at least 1 pool, the hardship pool, later in the year. But while you study on that, Mr. Skilling's done a yeoman's job on this. Taken quite a bit of machination to get those figures to work, and in fact, in one place, we even go negative for a few months. However, it would seem to me, since we have so many things moving forward, and then you add 966, so you're going forward in 2000, because next year, 966 plus the 690. The way out here. 966 had permits granted in 2019, and they're all moving forward. Presumably, they're not going to be built in 2019 because that's past, so they will be built in either 20 or 21. So we have those 996 moving forward because they had their permits granted by December 31st of 2019. My concern is that those are going forward unabated, count against nothing, and that in effect we could actually be adding this 966 if they were all built next year, plus the 693. We would be looking at 1,500, 1,600 units that could be built next year. My thought is that, that's going to happen. In order to bring it down to 1%, and to provide this ordinance, the authors told me was a response to the fact that there were no affordable units being built in the city. So our affordable allocation is going to be almost nothing for the next couple of years. And activity is going to be very few units for the next couple of years. We could stay within, in fact, we're not in the 4 corners of the plant now because there are so many elements that are missing from it, such as council review. My thought is that we take the 5-year banking portion to and route all of these things that are going forward in the next couple of years, including the 996, into a 5-year banking. That would provide the same number of units, but it would amortize them over a longer period, leaving more permits available year by year in the next 5 years than we would have available over the next 2. Correct. Certainly, if we go with your plan and do it all in 2 years, the pain is over in 2 years. But there will be less pain for a longer time if we amortize these numbers you have over 5 years instead of over 2. It's that simple. It uses one of the very basic corners of 200, which is the 5-year banking plan and allocation. And council would be, as Mr. Hutchison is asking, us to grant those applications. So we get council oversight, we get allocation, we get banking, and we have a much less painful annual number of permits available. We will have more permits available each year and accomplish the same goal. And presumably, we would have more affordable units being built in those times, and the developers would have a larger number of possible permits or allocations full. So I think it would be a win-win for everybody, especially the 1% and the provisions of 200, which we would be not honoring with a wink and a nod under your plan. We would have all of the provisions of 200 met and complied with, and we would have more permits per year over that amortization. So we have the same outcome that you are offering, but it's less painful. We have more new room to maneuver toward affordability and toward putting units on these blighted properties we'll be discussing shortly. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Springsteen?
Well, there's some debate over the language regarding banking plans that I have heard, but some of the language that had been suggested along the lines of what Councilor Abel is saying is that pending applications for the 886 dwelling units, which are the 40+ projects, will automatically be granted allocations after a hearing and approval by council. Those 886 allocations will be place-held for 5 years, automatically granted a banking plan. Thus, the 886 units will be spread out over 5 years, not 2, leaving more allocations available during 2020 and 2021. That way, we do not hold place at the expense of projects that are ready to go. And so I think one concern is just that there be a hearing regarding these 4 larger projects. And that has been a suggestion that a hearing still be required for them. One concern too is that is that 200 will not be completely honored if we allow too many of these projects to proceed. But I'd like to just hear more discussion about the idea of whether we can, under the ordinance, bank these over a longer period of time, so that we have more allocations available, which thereby protects 200 over the long run, so that we are providing enough allocations for people who need to build over a longer period of time. But this is just one suggested amendment, is that either those 4 projects go to council approval, or we try to do a 5-year banking plan if we think we can do it under the ordinance, or both. Thank you.
Councilor Franks?
Thanks, Mayor Paul. I'm hoping to get a little bit more information, so to the folks bringing that forward, is there something that we can reference as far as kind of the details of the plan? Is there anything that we can kind of put up for our community to look at this
So
point?
we were gonna have that, and I contacted Mr. Skilling earlier, early last week, or late last week, to try to get some information on how these 708 units figure into his plan, and I'm still waiting for that answer. That's why we don't have it, all printed up, and I would remind that in the first go around when Mr. Skilling came up with his original plan, it was much on the same basis.
Well,
I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
okay, again, since I have nothing to look at, I'm just kind of looking at the banking application section. And so I think to help the community with some context, I'm reading from section 1, and I'll just read it. It says, banking of allocations will be permitted in the following circumstances only. And then the next 3 sections talk about the smaller 40 units or less. And it says there, keep in mind, it says only these circumstances. The director of planning shall approve an application for banking of allocations for residential projects of 40 units or fewer if the number of units to be banked corresponds to that found in an entire building or buildings in the project, and if the allocations are proposed to be used within the same calendar year as the initial award of the allocation. The second provision is the Planning Commission may approve a banking plan for multifamily projects of 40 units or fewer for the purposes of banking beyond the end of the calendar year upon a finding that the building configuration, site constraints, or infrastructure phasing reasonably require that a larger increment of the development be built at one time. And then the third is the Planning Commission may approve a banking plan for residential projects of 40 units or fewer upon a finding that the building configuration, site constraints, and infrastructure phasing reasonably require that a larger increment of the development to be built at one time. So that kind of takes care of those smaller ones. And those are very prescriptive specifically on how to handle that. Then it goes on and it talks about now the over 40 units. And it says application for banking of allocations for projects over 40 units shall be made at the time of the allocation application. The application set forth a banking plan which includes total number of dwelling units and the number of allocations sought to be banked, the time period during which the validity of allocations is proposed for extension, and reason therefore. And what I'm getting to is I know we've been trying to really carve something out that respects kind of the boundaries of that. And so it talks later about the 5-year, but it has very prescriptive of how we get to banking of allocations. And so I'm not seeing how your plan fits in. So can you help me with that?
I can help you by example. And that is that there are a lot of things that are prescribed in 200 that we're not going to be following in this first 2 years, including not having units of 40 or more come before council for approval. We're sending some of those through under the Skilling plan. Only one of them would be held back for review. I see a possible problem with that, but I also think that all of them could stand muster with us. My point being that in these first 2 years, and this whole proceeding, the 6 months after the ordinance supposedly went into effect, let me tell you, it never went into effect. All we did was certify and codify it, but not one provision has been followed in the last 6 months that I can find. So as long as we're outside the 6-month period where it could not be changed, so now we can change it. You're saying, oh, let's don't make any changes in the banking part to make this easier for us, but let's drop the review of units of 40 or more. I mean, they're both changes. I don't like either one of them. I would prefer staying 100% with the language of the ordinance, which isn't that hard to understand, which could be a lot more easily implementing than we're doing in this makeshift kind of fashion. So as long as we're making those, as long as we're making those kinds of changes, let's make a change that will make it a win-win. Let's make a change that takes the banking, and I have checked with the authors of 200, and they agree that that comes close to fitting with their goal and intention than letting everything go without any review. And the allocations we're about to award, we're going to give these folks, we're sending what? 693 available applications through. And we're not doing them with review as required. So if we're going to change it a little bit and tweak it a little bit, let's tweak it where we are, get a win-win out of this. And just go ahead with it. In 2 years, unless we make further changes, 2020 or 200 is going to kick in the way it was intended to start. And we will have an actual 1% a year. Now also, this came in, this was approved, certified on July 12th. And it says from here on, you get 1% a year. To me, that means in the last half of 2019, there should have been 0.5% to fulfill that goal. And we didn't do that. So I think we can stay true to the basic concepts, do a little bit of tweaking, which is already on the table. Instead of following everything word for word in one section and then freelancing the other sections. So if we're going to do a bit of freelancing, let's freelance where we need to do it to make it all work. And to make it all work for everyone, including folks who need affordable housing, including folks who want a 1% limit, and including developers who need some certainty and probably a few more allocations over the next 4 years to complete what they already have money invested.
Thank you, Councilor Abel. I think it's important that we kind of stay focused on, we were just asking questions. I was seeking information. I mean, Councilor Skilling put his out there, whether you or others like it or don't. The whole point is we're here tonight to debate that. So I was simply looking for something else to have in front of me that would be an amendment or a brand new thing to consider. Because again, the public doesn't have that, we don't have that. So I wasn't trying to be argumentative. I was simply saying that we needed that information. So, excuse me, I have the floor, please. Also, I think it's important that maybe I'm misunderstanding, but my understanding of what's in front of us that Councilor Skilling put together was it does reduce that. So I would like the audience to have some clarity. It is a reduction, but again, it can be debated. We can look at this through different lenses. But I think it's important not to ascribe to other counselors outcomes. If there's an amendment you want to bring, I think that that's important to bring that so we can get those things to an up-down vote. So I'm open to all the discussion, but would have liked to have had something in writing where I could reference. Thank you.
I would like to have provided that as well. And I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to draw a parallel between what Mr. Skilling is doing and what I'm suggesting. So, my apologies, it's not in print, but I don't think that everyone out here can follow what's up there. And there are the folks who need to be informed as well. I would like to have provided a fact sheet to the community as well. But we had holidays, and we had folks out of town, and we had meetings that didn't occur. The logistics were pretty difficult. But as long as we're changing one thing, doesn't seem to be any, if we're changing one thing without stigma, we should be able to change another thing. That's all I was trying to say in my explanation.
Mayor Pro Tem Skilling.
I think there's much more to the debate after we hear public comment. I just want to bring up one fact. Councilor Abel You said you were waiting for my explanation on the 700 units, I believe. I received the same information as you on Friday, and I did look into that. And that is what we heard earlier. In the entire year of 2019, you have 966 building permits issued. 700 some odd of those, 713 or so, were done in December of 2019. And so some folks may have taken that to think that, wow, the city just issued 700 right at the end of the year. But the full context of that is there was only 966 total for that year. So that means there was approximately 200 and some odd building permits issued the entire year up until December. 500 of those units that were approved in December were 2 projects. One of those was the project we all sat up here and implicitly approved in July, and that was the West Line project that was 281. They hadn't even yet applied for their building permit as of July. Those building permits were issued because they did get their application in. Those were approved subsequent, and those were approved in December. Similarly, you had another 200 of those 700 came from an application in June 2018, and that was the 1605 Sheridan project. So that was a project that's been around for a year and a half. Well, so the full context of it, it wasn't that the city was rushing to issue any building permits. That's when they came to fruition. It would be one thing if it was 700 plus the 966, and all of a sudden all these numbers we were working with were no longer valid. That wasn't the case. The numbers are still the same. The building permits were just issued at a different time. They were issued in December. So that's the full context. And I explored that. I talked to Councilor Abel and others. We got to the contact with the city and got to the bottom of it, and that's what the explanation was.
Not quite, because we did not know the context of those 713 and what all they were included in and how they fit in with your other. And then I asked you about it, and I didn't hear from you, and I asked you about it again, or you finally called today and said, oh, you've only heard of this 16 minutes ago, you had to check it out. I asked you to call me back, and you did not. So those things remained in question with me until today. I would like to have had an answer earlier last week, because figures were not available to me until Friday.
Mr. Mayor, could we have public comment, please?
Councilor Duarte? All right, so I appreciate that. There's certainly one defined amendment, and there was some talk about another, so I will open up the public comment. I'm going to remind the audience, we talked about the rules, certainly understand there's a lot of passion both ways. People may agree, people may disagree, but everybody's going to have the right to do that peacefully tonight. And if we aren't able to do that, then we'll find other ways, but I'm sure that you will all join me in really getting us through this in a civil manner. And we certainly know that we see folks do this when they're excited. Certainly okay, as long as you're not doing this. Okay, public comment, first up, Mike Smith.
Back up. I apologize, I was squinting, I wasn't able to review this. Since we only have 3 minutes tonight, I've prepared our written comments as well as our oral comments here. And so I'll supply a copy here for City Council as well as clerk and staff. Good evening, I'm Mike Smith from Ladies Council for Progressive Communities. I'd like to first start by saying that our written comments were actually in support of the unamended version of draft resolution 2020-8. So our comments tonight would probably be mostly limited to that and urging City Council to adopt the unamended version of 2020-8. For a brief introduction, Crescent's the applicant of a pending major site plan submitted in March 2019 for redevelopment of the site commonly known as White Fence Farm. We submitted the letter to City Council today. It summarizes briefly why City Council should adopt the unamended version of Resolution 2020-8. Crescent supports the unamended version of Resolution 2020-8 because it would properly allow a limited amount of projects like Crescent's to be processed according to the laws and regulations in existence when their applications were submitted. This approach is both consistent with the plain language of the Lakewood Growth Initiative and state law concerning vested property rights. First, the initiative itself is not intended to apply retroactively. We've all been debating what the meaning is of the authority to continue provision. Its plain language doesn't require that applications be approved prior to the initiative's effective date. The plain language states any building permit that has gone through the processes necessary to secure a building permit, including but not limited to rezoning and subdivision, and was legally and formally applied for prior to the adoption of this chapter, may be continued without obtaining an allocation. Draft resolution 2020-8 unamended incorporates this concept. It does not add an additional feature of considering whether a site plan has been appealed to the Board of Adjustments. And I'd also like to note that the recent challenges to Crescent's project are not relevant to this consideration. They concern disputes over the interpretation of the zoning ordinance, which is a separate issue. And I'd like to note that, for the record, that both the planning director as well as the Board of Adjustment both affirmed Crescent's understanding of the zoning ordinance and will apply it. And even had the Board of Adjustment disagreed with the planning director, they still would have proceeded with reviewing the application. The application would proceed. It's just a matter of whether you apply certain standards from the zoning ordinance versus the plan development adopted in 1982. I'd also like to refer City Council to the statements in the letter concerning vested property rights. There's important constitutional questions as to retrospective application of law. So I implore you to please review that before you take action. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Shearer? Sure. And then I have Cheryl Law School. Cheryl's still there. And then Bill Furman. Good evening.
Hello, Mayor, hello, City Council. Again, I'm Andy Sheeter. My family owns the land right there at the station at RTD and Sheridan. Again, when we bought this property, all this was owned properly. It was within the legal zone. And we just encourage a no-brainer to make sure that's still viable, and then we can build there. Sheridan's as bad as Colfax. If you feel safe walking from the corner of Colfax to the RTD station, you're doing well. But anyhow, we just encourage to make sure these kind of projects, they're obviously blighted all down that street right there. We encourage you to at least drive by and take a look at that. That's just something. It's the entrance to the city on the west line. It needs to be done. And we just encourage you to go ahead and see that we protect that part of the project as far as being able to build on that. We want to see a hotel go in there. And it needs a nice one right there at Lakewood. So please take a look at that stuff and some of those kind of projects like that. They just need to be done, and it keeps the city looking good, and we get a walkable area there, which that was supposed to be when we bought all of those properties 10 years ago. And we're still trying to get everything, so it's buildable. But we need this to go through so we can protect that part of the city and get it taken care of. Thank you.
Cheryl? Oh, you don't wish to speak? Okay. Bill? Herman? Ms. Nguyen, you do not wish to speak? No, I'm sorry, I didn't say Lynn. Steven?
Okay. All right. Thanks for having me. I'm here tonight as both a lifelong resident of Lakewood and also as an architect who's worked in municipalities throughout Colorado and throughout the country. I recognize your challenge in implementation of ordinance 1447, and I'm grateful you're working to find a way to implement this ordinance without sacrificing the city for those that seek to prevent new housing. I hope this does not become a mechanism to prevent multifamily development as well, as I know some people seek to use it that way. This is a law, and that's certainly everyone's aware of that, and it will certainly limit growth. Let's hope it does not, let's hope it does what it claims it's going to do, which is to protect affordable housing. And by that I mean affordable housing for the median household income in our community. Also, as a parting side note, I look forward to seeing the city, we are going to find ways to encourage economic development and new business while trying to prevent new residents. Thank you.
Can't quite read the writing, but it's 11167 West 17th Avenue. Sheila? Okay. Are you interpreting it better than myself? Selena? Selena? Okay, next up I have Laura, and you have Michael. Hunter, you're here. Lynn King, are you here? Lynn King. Peggy Ralph? Peggy here? Is Peggy here? Gotta have you here if you're fooling time. Come on down, Laura, you're good. No. Okay. So we'll grant you 10. Ms. Ralph is not in. Oh, we'll grant you 10. No. But go ahead, let's go.
My theory will.
So I'm telling you, I'll give you 10. She's not in here though.
Okay, I
Just
did
so
not,
folks
I did
know.
not know she was not.
Yeah, you have to sign up and you have to be here. But you're good to go. 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate the difficulties and the timing with amendments, et cetera. However, it takes us time to prepare, just like it takes y'all time to prepare. And so contrary to some comments, that we're just a group of citizens who come down here who are passionate and emotional because we don't like what's happening in our backyard. Most of us are actually a group of very well-informed citizens. We not only have the right to hold our elected and appointed officials accountable in this country with the forms of government that we have an obligation and a duty to remain vigilant and to hold our officials accountable, elected and appointed. And our only means to hold our appointed officials accountable is through this body, because you are our elected officials. What floors me tonight, Mr. Skilling, and I do respect a lot of the work that you do. I understand you're an attorney, but I really don't know that for sure, is that 6 months later, we are still getting surprise documents on the dais on one of the most important issues that this city has faced, and you are charged with resolving in many, many, many years. And so I'm having a really difficult time understanding why this new amendment, which we cannot prepare for to address, is put up when we have not seen it. I would also like to just make a statement that Ms. Kentner could not be here tonight, and I'm a poor pinch hitter for her. But my comments incorporate some of the things that she intended to talk about tonight. And again, all of these things were prepared based on the packet that we had. The staff memo in the packet states there was consensus that applications, building permit applications of projects would be exempted from allocation. You know, most of us are kind of confused about when that became the definitive and authoritative statement by this council. The resolution. This is the resolution that's been referenced so many times. Notice it says revised, July the 15th. This is a resolution that time after time after time, when you introduce a resolution, you call for a public hearing or public comment on that resolution. We cannot comment on a document that we did not see. This resolution was introduced by Mr. Skilling on the dais on July the 15th at your special meeting. We did not see this resolution. We did not see the whereases. We didn't see anything in this resolution. We cannot comment on it with the exception of a paragraph that was put up on the overhead screen, which I think got a minor tweaking at some point. This resolution, with your comments, Mr. Skilling, made the people in the audience that night believe that you meant what you said, that the purpose of this resolution was in fact to acknowledge Mr. Parker's presentation that there was one project, the Westline Village, close enough to getting a building permit, and that this resolution provided a timeout so that staff could start preparing the projects to bring to council that required oversight in the hearing. I've listened to that meeting 20 times. I've made extensive notes on what was said. I want to know an explanation for this section. Provided building permits are issued on or before December 31st, 2019, after which time the development project will require an allocation and be subjected to the allocation process on or before the end of December 2019. Again, this was not noticed. We had no opportunity to review the resolution. We could not get a copy of the resolution until sometime after the fact. So we've been in this pattern of surprise things happening on the dais that we are not afforded the opportunity to look at. Mr. Skilling, you stated on January the 6th that this is very complicated. And yet, every meeting, I don't hear the same numbers. I have never heard the same numbers. They change with every meeting. And at no point has a complete listing of the projects that we are all talking about ever been provided as an exhibit to any document that you have considered. And so we don't even really know what those projects are. So you're going to set allocations. The current plan will fully exempt from both allocations and the 1% growth cap limit over 700 units that were granted building permits in the last 20 days of 2019. We're still fuzzy on how all these numbers work together, and we have since heard some explanation to this point. You heard me speak at length on January 26th to the surprise compromise. In fact, what you're doing is giving a pass to developers with large projects at the expense of individuals and the expense of affordable housing. We saw staff parade down affordable housing experts with the doom and gloom of what 200 is doing for that, and yet giving a pass to projects where staff set up a policy based on the May 10th memo that did not come to this council, and you heard Mr. J. Hutchinson tell you on the 6th that the council was not briefed on that, and it was written by staff. So you are giving a pass to projects that staff set up a policy for and was not the practice, was not the normal routine course of business. You heard the village at Morse Park submitted a building permit application 3 weeks after submittal of a major site plan application. There's no way that they met all the processes required. So you want to make up an extra 1,233 exempted units by a convoluted formula setting a 1 1/4% limit for 2020 and hoping that you will do the same for 2021. This plan also will exempt 8 projects of 40 units or more from council oversight, which is inherent in this ordinance. So I'm going to take you back to 2012 and the abuses that have happened in mixed-use zoning. Since 2012, Mr. Parker testified as recently as January 15th, nothing requires a mixed-use zoning district to actually have mixed use. So what has happened is overdense apartment complexes, too high for neighborhoods, plopped in the middle of neighborhoods with no oversight and no rights recognized of the citizens that live around them. So the numbers you're talking about seem to come up with all the fudging, a nearly 3% growth cap. The way that you want to try to make up and adjust, and basically again, you're giving a pass to developers who were encouraged by planning staff in communications in May and June to submit building permit applications. It's not that they were grandfathered in. You had staff actively soliciting the developers to get those applications in, and it didn't matter what stage of the process that they were in. And we have told you about this over and over and over and over again, until it makes me physically sick that the majority of you are turning a complete blind eye to this. We as citizens expect fairness. We expect application of the law, and you swore an oath to uphold the laws of the city of Lakewood. And we are disgusted that the majority of you place precedence for developers of large projects who are out of state over your own residents who pay your salaries, your own citizens who have invested so much in this community. I'm angry because I'm tired of being lectured about decorum when the members of this body need to convene and have a meeting and etiquette on respect and decorum. Mr. Mayor, if you have lost respect of this audience, it is because respect is earned, it is not given. And if you do not respect this audience, I ask you, what does it say to you that people who have been coming down here for months have abided by decorum, and we are so angry at the point that we are telling you, set the example, respect the citizens that come here. And several of you on this council need to pay attention to that lesson, because smirks and faces and disregard and disrespect to citizens, we see every expression. And we expect better, and mostly we demand better. You're here.
So I've asked you to join me in this journey tonight, and we've talked about it a few different times. There may be people in here who don't agree with you. Okay, well, we care because we're gonna have civil discourse in this arena, and so I'm gonna take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll come back.
Second graders,
So,
being punished now.
I asked you to just join me, I've asked you from the beginning tonight. We have certain norms, and we sit up here, there's other people in the audience that listen and respect you, and all I'm asking is for the same tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, wait.